Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, South Africa rolls back a state of emergency over a national power crisis, even though rolling blackouts are still crippling the country's economy. The electricity shortages have been blamed on years of mismanagement at state utility Eskom. Also, Africa's bounced back better than the worst-case fears of the continent's ability to absorb economic shocks from the war in Ukraine. Imports are expected to be up over the next year, but wiggle room is slim. And blooming marvellous. In Tunisia, spring is marked every year with an explosion of orange blossom. The heady scent wafts through the air of orchards, and as well as being the darling of the perfume world, they're used in everything from coffee to medicine. But first, South Africa's ended the state of disaster brought in 2 months ago over the country's crippling power shortages. The move allowed the government to exempt certain essential services from scheduled power outages. Now, those have eased up only slightly since February, and there's some concerns that the state of disaster has been rolled back too soon. Nadine Tron has more.
It's been less than 2 months since South Africa entered a national state of disaster to deal with the power crisis, and the government says it has done enough. However, recording this in the pitch darkness using a mobile phone-powered light, it's clear that nothing has changed for the average South African, who still experience up to 7 hours without electricity daily. The government says the new electricity minister has already made a huge impact. Soon after his appointment a few weeks ago, Hussein Soramokgopa visited the country's main power stations and is happy with the plans put in place to up power output. So off the back of that, government says a national emergency can be averted. It says it has done a lot to lessen the impact of these power cuts called load shedding. Several new regulations were brought in under the state of disaster. The most controversial being a law that exempts the failing state power supplier Eskom from declaring any irregularities or wasteful expenditure in its annual financial reports. Eskom doesn't have a CEO at the moment, as its former boss left the job immediately after publicly accusing the utilities management of corruption. On Wednesday, the South African finance minister assured Parliament that Eskom's reporting exemption will be scrapped immediately. Opposition parties have welcomed the end of the state of disaster, but some voices have raised concern that government still hasn't done enough to get the country through the oncoming winter months without increased power cuts.
Nadine Tron there, getting the goods to us no matter the obstacle. Well, the northern Ethiopian region of Tigray, in other news, has unveiled a new cabinet in the last crucial step of a peace process aimed at ending 2 years of brutal conflict. The 27-member government includes members of the Tigrayan TPLF party and military commanders who battled federal forces during the war. The establishment of an interim administration was a key condition of a peace deal signed in South Africa's capital, Pretoria, last November by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's government and the TPLF. Now, although Africa was hit hard by the economic shocks to imports and food security caused by the war in Ukraine, the continent's done better than expected in bouncing back from the disruption. Projected increases in global trade are slightly up for this year, and Africa is expected to import more in 2023 than last year. But the balance is a fragile one across the board. I'm joined now for a closer look at all this by Mr. Coleman Nee, who is a senior economist at the World Trade Organization. Coleman, thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us. Now,
my pleasure.
First of all, right off the back of the war in Ukraine last year, when it first started, there was fear of some truly devastating effects on the continent. But it's rebounded better than expected. What happened?
Thanks. Well, actually, after the war in Ukraine started, there was fear of reduced food supplies worldwide because Ukraine and Russia are big suppliers of grain to many countries, including in Africa. And also, world energy supplies were expected to be reduced. So commodity prices spiked, particularly energy, but also food prices. And there was, for example, one example is Ethiopia that imported 42% of its grain imports from Russia and Ukraine before the war. But trade actually helped to cushion the shock. What happened was Ethiopia was able to import more grain from the United States, from Argentina, and so free trade has allowed countries to adjust to shocks like this. As for energy, Africa did actually pretty well out of the spike in prices. Africa has 70% of the continent's exports are primary products, including 42% fuels like oil and natural gas. And although the continent's export volume, the quantity of exports was only up around 1%, the value of the exports was up 18%. So they had a big boost in export revenue because of that. But of course, not all African countries are energy exporters. So the ones that are net importers may have been squeezed a bit by the increased cost. So anyway, this is much better than some of the worst case scenarios that we anticipated at the start of the conflict. We looked into different scenarios, and in a worst case scenario, we could have had much lower production of and trade in wheat worldwide and other grains. But what happened was actually there was evidence of substitution across suppliers, like we saw in the case of Ethiopia, but also across products. So instead of wheat, world wheat trade was down around 7%, but world rice trade was up. So you would see this kind of substitution as a result of having a free and open multilateral trading system.
Mm-hmm. So a combination of substitutions, higher prices in energy commodities, and sourcing kind of essential imports from different suppliers has created a bit of wiggle room for the continent. But is that likely to last? What is the prospect for Africa going forward?
Well, there's no escaping the fact that the conflict in the Ukraine has reduced the amount of arable land under cultivation and reduced global grain supplies. And so far in 2022, we were able to get through the year reasonably well because of a warmer than expected winter in Europe, but also the ability to find new sources of supply for food. But if there were a crop failure in some other major producer, the situation could again become critical. So we have less wiggle room because of the food production situation. So that's something to be on the lookout for. But also Africa's export revenues might be down this year. So already commodity prices, energy commodities are down 25%. Compared to 2022, and other non-energy commodities are down 6% in value in the first part of the year so far. So that with stagnant volumes, Africa might see a drop in export revenue compared to the previous year, although the previous year was quite high.
Thank you so much for talking us through all that. Coleman Neither, senior economist from the World Trade Organization.
Thank you.
Now, Somaliland is a self-declared state in practice, even though technically it's still seen as being part of Somalia. This lack of diplomatic recognition makes it difficult to keep its economic development plans on track. The country's GDP is estimated to be about 3.5 billion euros for about 5 million inhabitants, which is an extremely small ratio, though Hargeisa insists that it is politically stable compared to its Somali and Ethiopian neighbours. Attracting international investment is still proving to be difficult. Our correspondents take a closer look.
The port of Berbera is being modernized. The Emirati company DP World has invested more than 400 million euros in it. The gateway to Somaliland can now receive around 500,000 containers per year.
Since we are expanded, we received a bigger vessels, which is carrying 10,000 containers, and that's called direct call from China, from India, so we can supply other regions' ports from here.
The facilities currently serve Ethiopia and compete with the port of Djibouti. Somaliland's pushing to further develop its infrastructure. The capital is also growing rapidly. Buildings and hotels are multiplying, and the diaspora is driving many of the projects.
I'll show you one of our rooms. Come.
After 20 years in England, Mustafa returned to invest in his country. luxurious rooms, restaurants. He spent almost 7 million euros to create this place.
If you invest in Somaliland, the rate of return is very high. At the moment, the stability and the economy of this country is growing.
At least 40% of the population benefits from remittances from the diaspora. The Minister of Finance admits that they have an important economic impact. He believes recognition of the country is key to its successful development. Although Somaliland is a sovereign state in practice, it is still technically considered to be part of Somalia.
Now we want to build a port or an airport or a road, which requires maybe $100 million US. Normally, a recognized country would go to the World Bank or to one of the international financial institutions and borrow money. We can't.
Somaliland needs this international support. If assessed as an independent nation, its GDP per capita is around 700 euros, making it the poorest country in the world.
Now, in Tunisia, every March, sour orange trees are in full bloom. The flowers have a heady fragrance, and in Tunisia, they're used in everything from stimulants in coffee, as medicine, in perfume. Our Olivia Bizot has the story.
In Tunisia, it's orange blossom season. The precious flower, or white gold, is a source of national pride. Ever since retiring a few years ago, Samia Marzoug has kept herself busy every spring by harvesting the flowers in front of her house. She then distills them to make her very own orange blossom water.
I pick up the orange blossoms. Every year I pick about 16 kilos, which produces about 16 litres of floral water. It's for me and my children. We use it in the kitchen, we cook with it. We repeat the tradition every year.
It's a ritual that Khania Mansour, a professional orange blossom distiller, has mastered. She uses an artisanal distillation technique that was passed down by her mother and grandmother. The flower petals are boiled in these copper pots. The steam is then captured and condensed by using cold water, which produces the floral magic.
I've stuck to our family's traditional method because our materials are among the best in the world. Copper is the best for retaining the heat, and the clay pots are the best for keeping the water cold. The materials we use are 100% natural.
Tunisia's orange blossom is renowned around the world. It's used in cosmetics, baking, and even traditional medicine.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.
Poverty, insecurity, violence. Difficult to imagine a future in Haiti. A government in crisis.
Pour avoir des élections crédibles, la première attente à laquelle il faut répondre, c'est la question de la sécurité.
Police forces are losing control as gangs establish their rule.
Haiti's hell right now. They like we are trapped in the prison, all right? We can do nothing.
Despite the downward spiral, some still hold out hope.
Ils vont en Haïti, dans la réalité haïtienne, dans ce qu'elle a d'inacceptable, dans le rêve de pouvoir la changer.
Reporters, The Wounds of Haiti, on France 24 and France24.com. The best of culture every day on France 24, with exclusive interviews with the most talked about people in entertainment. Encore's Eve Jackson and Olivia Salazar-Winspear bring you the latest from the world of art and entertainment. Our critics Marjorie Hash and Florence Villeminot speak to the biggest names in music. And Lisa Nesselson and Deeptika Laurent share the newest must-see films and TV series.
Join us every day for the latest from the world of arts and culture on Encore.